get some bread. If you watch online, you don't get that. So come to class. Thank y'all for being here. We're continuing in Deuteronomy this morning. We'll be in chapter 12, so you can go and flip your Bibles and your study books or whatever you're using this morning over to chapter 12. We're going to be kind of focusing in verses 1 through 11 and 29 through 32. So if you had to title this passage about what this would be, it's pretty much undivided worship. What is worship? And we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning and kind of define. We're going to talk about what worship was for the Israelites and kind of what worship is for us and what that looks like. So the feeling or expression of reverence or adoration for a deity, or showing reverence or adoration, honor with religious rites. That is Webster's definition of worship. So when let's give it not so much the Webster definition. Let's talk about what our definition. So when I say worship, what comes to mind for you? What words comes to mind? What do you think of when you hear the term worship? What are some words that can describe worship, or just generally, what is your sense of worship?
I think like before Brother Steve preaches, that's what we do.
Yeah. Some music, right? Music's a form of worship, right? What else?
Prayer.
Prayer? Yeah, absolutely. Probably the highest form of worship is prayer to the Father, because that's an open dialogue, right? That's talking to God. What else? I think of reverence, right? I like we should approach worship with reverence. So we are worshiping the Creator of heaven and earth. Anything else? We'll talk a little bit more later, but on the flip side, let's do the flip side of the coin. What are some things that you think now that, Brother Steve talks a little bit about the TV evangelism these days, but what are some things that are portrayed as worship but are not necessarily what you would think are worship, or not correct worship of the Lord? What are some of those things? Any ideas on that?
Having experience.
Yeah.
Something that seems like self-serving.
Yeah. I mean, the prosperity gospel, I mean, that's the hot word of the day nowadays with some of the TV evangelism, but that is, well, in my opinion, worship for profit. That's where I think you start getting off the rails of worship, and that reverence goes away when it's obviously, to your point, a showmanship thing. It's more of a look at me and not look at he, right? It's kind of what I think of when I think of not correct worship. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. But all right, if you got your Bibles, let's flip over. Let's do verses 1 through 11 first. That's where the meat of this is. 29 through 32 is just Moses is kind of reiterating some of the things he said. They're important, but I want to kind of focus our energy on 1 through 11 first and talk about those, and then we'll tie it together with 29 through 32. But if somebody's got 1 through 11, if you'll read it, and we'll start there.
Be careful to follow these statutes and ordinances in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess all the days you live on the earth. Destroy completely all the places where the nations that you are driving out worship their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every green tree. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, burn their Asherah poles, cut down the carved images of their gods, and wipe out their names from every place. Don't worship the Lord your God this way. Instead, turn to the place the Lord your God chooses from all your tribes to put his name for his dwellings, and go there. You are to bring there your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tenths and personal contributions, your vow offerings and freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. You will eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice with your household in everything you do, because the Lord your God has blessed you. You are not to do as we are doing here today. Everyone is doing whatever seems right in his own sight. Indeed, you have not yet come into the resting place and the inheritance the Lord your God is giving you. When you cross the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all the enemies around you and live in security, then the Lord your God will choose the place to have his name dwell. Bring there everything I command you, your burnt offerings, sacrifices, offerings of the tent, and personal contributions, and all your choice offerings you vow to the Lord.
All right, thanks, sir. All right, so again, let's kind of set the scene for those that haven't been here in the last couple of weeks, or those online joining us that are not quite up to speed. So these commands that Moses is giving, who are those commands for? The Israelites. And what group of the Israelites in particular? Exactly. Yeah, a big chunk of that. But also from a higher perspective, what do we know about their time in the wilderness? They first arrived pretty quickly, right, in the plains, ready to go in the Promised Land. But then what happened?
They wandered for 40 years.
They wandered for 40 years. And that what did God say would happen to that generation before they would enter the Promised Land?
First generation died.
Yeah, they're going to die off, right? They're not going to enter the Promised Land. And that includes Moses. Moses will not enter the Promised Land. So who is Moses specifically talking to here? He's talking about second generation that came out of Egypt, right? The generation that pretty much knows only wandering in the wilderness. So he's giving them some pretty stern commands. It's interesting. A lot of the commands he's given are because of the failures of the first generation, right? He's pretty much telling them word for word of like, he could almost say, hey, you see all these people over here dying off, don't do what they did. This is how they ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because they didn't follow God's commands. They were fearful after they surveyed the land. So he's pretty much giving them a common sense speech on what not to do. And here's your living example of all these people over here that are not going to enjoy the fruits of the Promised Land. So let's take a look at verses 1 through 3 first. Be careful to follow these statutes and ordinances in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, he's recalling their ancestors. This is Abraham, this is Isaac, this is Jacob. He's recalling all these ancestors that he had promised will enter this land. And that'd be a pretty cool thought, right? I mean, if you're this new generation and you know your history, which the Israelites did, they passed all these stories down from Abraham all the way through. How cool would it have been to realize that you're the generation that God had promised that would enter the Promised Land? Pretty cool thought. But anyways, the God of your ancestors has given you to possess all the days that you live on earth. We've said it for the last couple of weeks, but this is not, the Israelites are not conquering this land. They're not conquering it. Although they're going to go in and fight, there's going to be bloodshed. The hand of God's going to be with them. It's already theirs. It's not in limbo. It's not, man, I hope our offense is good enough to score so we can take this land. It's none of that. It's already done. It's a done deal. As long as they follow these statutes and commands that God has given them, that land's already theirs. They possess it already. It even says the land, the given to possess all the days that you live on earth. That's important. All the days that you live on earth. And that's what's going on a lot in the Middle East right now. Is there is a groups of people that do not understand that land over there, that was given to Israel all the way back to here. When they crossed that Jordan from then on, and that goes all the way to now. It goes all the way until the end of time. That's the Israelites' land to possess. That's bar none. It says it right here in the Bible. Verse 2, destroy completely all the places where the nations that you are driving out worship their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every tree. Tear down the altars, smash their sacred pillars, burn the Asher poles, cut down the carved images of the gods, and wipe out their names from every place. What is God commanding them to do here? What's he telling? As soon as you go in this land, what do you got to do? Wipe them out, right? I don't want any of them. There's nothing to be left. That includes the people. Get rid of the people. And most importantly, get rid of the things that they show and worship. Why is God placing such an emphasis? Okay, you run the people out, that's fine. It's your land to possess. But why is he placing such an emphasis on wiping out all their places of worship, any sign of their worship? Why is that so important for Israel to do that?
Because it calls them to sin.
You would think that they would do it anyways, right? But us as human beings, what do we love? Why do we pay $3 for a bottle of water when you can just go to the tap and get it? Why do we do many of the things we do? It's all because what? We love convenience, right? We love convenience. It was pretty common practice in this time, and really probably still is to this day, for a conqueror to walk in and go, you know what, this will do. This is pretty good. We can use this. So it's pretty common practice. If there was a place of worship, regardless if it was pagan or whatever it was, like, well, you know, they did a pretty nice job on this. I don't see anything we need to change. And they would worship in that same facility, in that same building or whatever it was that was set aside for worship. So what God's telling them to do is do not do that, because
It causes me to sin.
yeah, it's easy for you to fall in the trap of like, you know, I wonder what that ball's about. Let's look a little deeper into it. You know, that's a pretty carving of ball. I wonder what this is all about. And it's easy to start conforming to the things that you're surrounded by. So that's why God placed such an emphasis. Don't do that. Wipe it out. I'm going to tell you how to start. I want you to start over. And I'm going to tell you how to do everything. I'm going to even tell you how to worship and where to worship. But it cannot be any semblance of the Canaanites that were in this land before. And to go a little bit deeper on that, I think it's important for us to understand how the Canaanites worship. So a tiny bit of history lesson here. But does anybody know about the Canaanites and how they worshiped? They worshiped one god or many gods? Many gods. They were polytheistic. Really big into idolatry. They had all their idols, their statues they worshipped. Even to go as far as, we'll talk about it, but they would even set up worship under trees. So they were very, very into idolatry and polytheism. They had pantheons to gods and goddesses, sort of that line of thinking. They also had a lot of forbidden practices of what we would see in even in biblical times, but modern times, of like, oh my goodness. They had temple prostitution. That was a thing in their time. They even was recorded of cross-dressing in religious, their kind of religious activities. And the biggest thing that there's some historical data on is there was child sacrifice as well in some of the Canaanites. So as bad as you get when it comes to worship, as far as, it was just pretty much a moral corruption within the Canaanite religion. And they were just morally deprived people. So that's why God is saying, because that's as bad as it gets. That's the worst of the worst when it comes to religion. So that's why God's telling them to wipe it out. You got to get all this out of there and start over. Let's go on to verse 5. Instead, turn the place of the Lord your God. Turn to the place the Lord your God chooses from all the tribes to put his name for his dwelling, and go there. Why did Moses emphasize God choosing the place of worship?
Well, it was going to be a place to worship him.
Yeah. And it was important for them. Well, we'll talk about it here in just a second. But God was, up to this point, pretty much every religion, we'll specifically talk about the Canaanites, it was kind of a feel-good worship deal. It's like, you know, it feels right to worship under this tree, or it feels right to build a temple to Baal right here. It was very much a feel-good religion, which, ironically, does that sound familiar to you nowadays? But that's very much how they worshiped. So God was sitting, and something he was doing with his chosen people, going all the way back to Abraham, is he was setting them exactly counter to how everything was going in the world. In other words, he was having them swim upstream. He was turning them to face away from everything that they were going to worship one God. That God was going to guide and tell them how to worship. All this was counter to anything else that was going on in the world. It was the people creating these gods and then would worship. Oh, the sun goes across the sky. There has to be a God for that. Oh, there's the moon God. This was all human created, and God was running counter to that with his peoples. No, I am the creator. I will guide you in these things. I will set these commands for you. I will come down on Mount Sinai and give you the commands to live by. No other quote-unquote little g gods were doing that. It was all human created. So God was setting his people aside to be counter to society, run completely the opposite direction. And that's why it's important that we understand that God was setting them and turning them away from the way the rest of the world worshipped and how they worshipped. And it's under, again, the Canaanites, we talked about it a little bit, but it was very much a feel-good society. They had worship set up everywhere, under a pretty tree, high on a mountain, just because they liked the view. And God commanded he would not be worshiped that way. He would be specific about how and where he was worshiped. They were not to set up. God was going to command them where to be worshiped. And this goes all the way back to the tent of meeting. Remember that? The tent of meeting, which then led into the tabernacle. If you remember, it was set up in a specific way to be worshipped in a specific way. There were only the certain people of the tribes of the Levites, the priests, the holy priest could only enter into the dwelling place of God. You know, it was very much laid out how that was to be worshipped. So, and to jump forward a little bit, God would specifically set the places of worship when they did cross into the promised land. First, they would set up worship for God at Gilgal. After crossing the Jordan, the tabernacle was set up there and remained for about 14 years during the conquest of the land. So while they were fighting, God specifically had them set it up in Gilgal. And then it moved to Shiloh following the conquest, and they established themselves in the land. The tabernacle was moved to Shiloh, where it remained for 369 years as the central place of worship. This is where lots were cast to divide the land among the remaining tribes. So this is the place where everything was divided out amongst the 12 tribes. And then where was the last place of worship set up? Everybody knows that, right? Solomon built what? Temple, right? Built the temple. Where did he build it? Jerusalem. Yeah. So that's where it would end up, and until it was destroyed. So there were 3 places that God had set up for permanent worship, or 2 of them were kind of not permanent worship, although 369 years is a lot. But Jerusalem would be the final place for the temple. And the most important point of this verse is God set the place of worship where he would worship, not where the people didn't set it where they felt it was good, or it was a nice place, or there was a nice flat piece of ground we could build a building. It was not decided by the people. It was decided by God himself. Verses 6 and 7, these next couple verses confirm how those offerings will be brought to that place of worship. 6 says, you are to bring your burnt offerings, sacrifices, your tents, and your personal contributions, your vows and offerings, and freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and your flocks. You will eat in the presence of the Lord your God, and rejoice with your household in everything you do, because the Lord your God has blessed you. So again, just kind of laying out how this practice would work. This is where I set up this place of worship. That's where you'll bring your offerings. That's where you'll bring your tithes. That's what he's talking about with the tents and all that. Same day we talked about today. So that's where he's talking about. You'll bring these things, you'll offer them to God, and you'll be blessed. Because why? You'll be worshiping together, right? He's saying this will be a place of, it's not necessarily even, it's a place of blessing of you bringing your offerings to God, but in return, this is a place where the people will be blessed. So it's important to understand. And then he flips the script kind of in verses 8 and 9. He gives them the old praise sandwich. Everybody knows what a praise sandwich is, right? You get a little bit of ice on the bun, then you slap you all the stuff you're doing wrong, and then you get a little bit of praise on the other side of the bun. So, verse 8, you're not doing as you're doing here today. Everyone is doing whatever seems right in his own sight. Indeed, you have not yet come into the resting place and the inheritance of the Lord your God is giving you. And that's really a quick snap back to reality. He's telling them all the things that are going to happen and the commands you're going to have to follow. But then he brings them back to present time and saying, but y'all ain't doing good enough. This is what I'm promising you, and what God has promised, and the message I'm delivering from God. This is all great. I'm telling you how it's going to go, but y'all got to do better. You're not doing good enough. It's just not good enough. And he's giving them some tough love here. And obviously we see that the people of Israel had drifted away from what God had intended during their time in the wilderness. It's pretty apparent, this was out of this commentary I thought was pretty good, it's pretty apparent they had established worship based on what they liked and not what God demanded. And he was not ultimately pleased with this. Worship was not a matter left up to whatever pleased the individual. Real worship is concerned with what pleases God. So again, Moses is telling them, y'all are not doing good. It's not good enough. That you're not reaching the level of worship for God, and you're not following God And I think Moses was probably frustrated with this because, again, we're just removed not many years from them being delivered out of slavery, the Red Sea being parted, God delivering all these amazing, the Ten Commandments, the first generation of people hearing the voice of God. I mean, could you imagine, fast forward to now, and just the way news and we digest news, could you imagine if there was a story about people hearing the voice of God, like a whole nation of people, like millions of people hearing the voice of God, what that would do? I mean, that would just be stunning. But I think we would probably be innocent of the same, or guilty of the same things the Israelites had, because even though they had gotten all this information, they just, the human nature, we just drift, right? We just drift from God. That was 30 years ago. I mean, I just really don't remember that much about it. So, it's 30 years ago. You don't remember when God literally parted the Red Sea for us to walk. It's pretty interesting. And I think Moses struggled with that, and it shows in some of his frustration with the people. But the good news is he's not giving up on them, because this is a new generation. He's trying. He's pouring everything. And that's part of the greatness of Moses, too, is because at this point, Moses should be riding off into retirement, right? He should be toast with these people. He's already kind of done his deal where he's not going to enter the promised land. He could have probably been pretty bitter about that. You know, we talked about it, but you make a mistake and you don't get to enter the promised land. But I think, and we talked a little bit about this just to emphasize it more, I think that was probably intentional on God's part, because Moses had become such a figure that it would probably have been easy for him to have been worshipped as well, right? Because he was the tip of the sword for everything for God. Although the power of God parted the Red Sea, but who parted it? Moses. Moses walked there and jammed the stick in the ground and the water parted. He led them through all this. He led them in the wilderness. He prayed to God and bread came down from heaven. So it'd be easy if you put yourself in that perspective of like, well, Moses can make some stuff happen. I mean, he's obviously, I mean, we understand it's God doing it, but boy, if Moses asks, it seems to happen. So it's easy, but and we know that because where's Moses buried? Somebody know? Trivia question. I got a guess?
Was it the mountain when he got towed on to promised land?
Wasn't it on the mountain?
Yeah, it just came to like where he got to see the promised land, but he never got.
Could be.
What it's called?
He did get carried up to the promised land. He got to see it before he died. But nobody knows. We have no idea. God hid it. God hid where Moses was buried. Nobody to this day knows where Moses is buried. Why is that? Because what would happen if they'd have buried Moses? And to this day, what would have happened? They would worship it, right? I mean, arguing Moses, there's lots of arguments to be made for men in the Bible. Moses might have been one of the greatest. He might just have been. I mean, he's right up there. He's on the Mount Rushmore of people in the Bible, let's say. And he would have been, his gravesite would have been worshipped by the Jews. It just would have. I mean, even with modern worshiping Jews, Moses is the man. I mean, he is the Torah. He gave him the Torah and all that. So God purposely, and I think that's part of the reason that maybe he didn't enter the promised land, and that was probably part of God's divine plan all along. This generation needed to be separated from Moses. They needed a new leader, but more importantly, they needed to rely fully on God and not just look at Moses to solve their problems. So, point in all that is God had a plan for them, and Moses was giving these final instructions to them and ultimately it's important for Moses to give these final instructions because he was going away. He was going to hand it over to somebody new. So this is kind of like the grandfather figure giving the last kind of rah-rah speech to the team and, win one for the giver sort of thing. So, and that's what Moses is doing here. So, verses 10 and 11, when you cross the Jordan and live in the land of your Lord your God is giving you an inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies around you, and you live in security. Then the Lord your God will choose the place to have his name dwell. Bring bring there everything I've commanded you, your burnt offerings, sacrifices, offering of the tenth, personal contributions, and your choice offerings you vow to the Lord. All that is, again, reiterated how you will treat these places of worship and what you'll do with these places of worship. You might know how they cross the Jordan River. You might know. We'll probably get into that, and we may cover it in this, but it was parted for the second time. Isn't that pretty ironic? I don't think it's ironic, but it was parted again for them to walk across. The waters were parted so they could walk across the Jordan.
Elijah part of it too.
Yeah, there was multiple.
And Elisha.
Yeah, there was multiple partings of the Jordan River, but it's a pretty sweet little bookend of like, okay, you got out of slavery and walked through parted water, and now you're going into again. We talked about it last week, but they were inheriting massive wealth because land was wealth, and they were about to inherit the greatest land in that part of the world. So it's pretty ironic that they left with nothing as slaves and out of parted water, and they were entering parted water to become the greatest nation on earth and in the wealthiest part of that. So pretty interesting, but yeah, we'll probably get into that. It's probably in one of these later chapters that we'll talk about, so we won't spoil too much of it. But, verse 29 through 32, I'll just read these real quick. When the Lord your God annihilates the nations before you, which you are entering, take possession of it and drive them out of their land. Be careful not to be ensnarled by their ways that they have been destroyed before you. Do not inquire about their gods, asking, how do these nations worship their gods? I'll also do the same. You must do the same to the Lord your God, because they practice every despicable act which the Lord hates for their gods. They burn their sons and daughters in the fire of their gods. Be careful in everything I command you. Do not add anything to it or take anything away from it. This whole passage is about worship and about, again, Moses is reiterating, which we've already talked about, is not conforming to what they do. Don't even ask any. He's going as far as don't even ask. Just wipe them out. Don't ask. The old kick butt and take names later. That's what he's doing here. It's like, don't even ask questions. Just get in there, wipe them out, burn it to the ground. We're going to start over with it. And God is placing such an emphasis on this because it's easy to get, like I said, get conformed. So I think to tie all this together, it's important to understand why do we worship? Why do we worship?
To honor God.
Yeah, in its simplest form, right? What else? Is it something we learn? Generally speaking, I think yes. It's something we learn to do better and grow in it. But I think I don't think it's a learned trait. I think we're born that way. We're born to worship. And God even goes so far as to say we're built for worship. Isaiah 43:21 says, this people I have formed for myself, they shall declare my praise. That says it right there. God says he formed us for himself. They shall declare my praise. How do we end up with the Athenian gods? How do we end up with Baal? How do we end up, when you read history books, how do we end up with all that? People created that, right? Why? You ever think about that? Why societies create a whole religious... When God is void in a group of people, what happens? We've seen it. It happens throughout history. They do what?
They do things based off like their own selfish desires.
Right. And through that they create what?
These gods.
Yeah. They create things to worship. There's been studies, even people that have been on these islands that have never had human contact, guess what they have? They have a worship system. They worship something, whether it's God, the rain, the sun, rain, the trees, something. They worship it. It's all through documented history that people create. So that tells you, even outside of what Isaiah was saying here, even outside of that, history tells us that we are created to worship. Because even when God is not central, or these tribes that have never heard the word, they'll create some kind of worship system. We see that with the Canaanites. They created a whole worship system, pagan worship system that they developed. So that tells us and helps us understand that we are created for worship. Look at verse 7. I want to go back and read verse 7. You will eat in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice with your household in everything you do, because the Lord your God has blessed you. So if we understand we're created for worship, what gifts do we get from worship? God's created for worship for us, to worship Him. But with that, verse 7 says, comes blessings, right? So what blessings do we get from worship?
Peace.
Fruits of the Spirit. You want to sing a song?
I'll let you sing.
No, it's okay. We don't need that. We don't need that on the record. What else? What are some other things we get?
I think like when you come to church and you worship at church, like the things you gain from it, like community,
Yeah,
the people around you, like other
Absolutely.
followers.
yeah, 100%. What else do we get? If we're going to worship, we get the best thing ever, right? Salvation through Jesus Christ. That comes from worship of God. It doesn't accidentally happen. When you worship God, and that Holy Spirit starts biting away at you and grabbing at you. That's because you're worshiping God. That is a pull. It's a gravitational pull towards God to salvation through Jesus Christ. And most importantly, we just get to rejoice and enjoy God's blessings, right? If you really sit down, and it's probably a good practice to have, it would be to sit down and write everything that you've been blessed with. Material, spiritual, whatever. If you just sit down and really say, I'm thankful that where I got a job, even though sometimes I don't like it. I'm thankful I got a car to get to that job. I'm thankful tonight when I get off work, I don't have to figure out how we're going to get food. There are people right now trying to figure out how they're going to eat. So it's all those things. If you really sit down, and it's through nothing that we've done on our own. It's all blessings. Every blessing flows from God. The Bible says that. That's everything. That's the blessing of having this. It's a blessing from God. Now it gets perverted and the enemy uses it, but this is a blessing. I can get on here and look up like, man, I'm struggling understanding this verse. And you can get 3 or 4 commentaries within a matter of 10 seconds that might help you understand it. That's a blessing from God. It helps you stay in. You think about like FaceTime, how a blessing that is. You can stay in touch with relatives that don't live here. Or see, if you're on a business trip, you can call your kids at night and see their face. It's something you couldn't do 20 years ago, 10 years ago. How long's the iPhone been around? Let's just say 20. That feels safe. Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, that's my point. Just the tiniest of the next breath you draw is a blessing from God. The sun coming up. It's never ending. It's a cycle over and over and over. And we just get so lost in just the tiniest of things that we get blessed with. You lay your pillow. We talked about it this morning, but God has blessed this nation because we've got people that will volunteer to go fight and die so you can lay your head on your pillow at night. That's a blessing from God. That a nation has that mentality that'll fight for its own people. So all that is a blessing from God. And there's 2 important things that I think we get out of these passages. The first is, don't be conformed by your surroundings. Moses reiterated that twice in this passage, which is like 12 verses in here, and he said it twice. And this kind of backs up what he was talking about in this. Moses commands the people to destroy everything. Don't even ask about it. He goes as far as, if you come across somebody on the street, don't even ask them. Just wipe it out. Do away with it. And God's telling us the same. Don't be conformed by your surroundings. Man, how hard is that to do today? It is so hard to not be conformed to what modern society is. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. A thing that I think and I believe with all my heart is the modern church has found a way to stay exactly the same distance away from what we see society as. Corrupt society. Let's just say corrupt society. 100 years ago, it was over here. Christianity was very conservative, very vocal. It was a huge part of society. Well, as society started corrupting and getting worse, what did the church do? Did it stay over here on it and stand on this ground? No, it didn't. It said, we're going to stay away from it, but we'll just keep sliding with it. So then what happens is hey, we don't still conform to modern society. Well, no, but you didn't stand your ground over here where you should have. You just slid with it. So now it's okay to have homosexual preachers. It's okay to have this or that. And we have a modern society and a modern church have just allowed ourselves to just slide on the same scale, be graded on the curve with society. And I think that's what God's talking about right here. Don't slide on it. Stand the ground. Stand your moral ground. This is the line. It's not a sliding line. This is the line. I think that's what Moses is reiterating here, and what's important that we can take out of this passage is literally, if something is making you stumble in your life and causing you problems, burn it. Throw it away. Break it over your knee. Whatever you got to do. We've done that with our kids a couple times with iPads or stuff, but just like a hard reset. We've done it. And saw tangible results out of it. And that's just, and listen, I'm as guilty. I need to do that myself too. I've tried to get myself off social media and all. That's hard to do during football season. I have to get my updates from other people. I feel like I'm missing some stuff. But you know what? I have to get away from that, because I'm going to tell you, you can get on social media and you can look at Bible verses all day. You can look at whatever you think is good stuff. And that algorithm, just because you're a 30-year-old man, is going to throw you some sexualized. It's going to just show you stuff that you never even look at, but it's going to hit you with that because you meet a certain demographic and what people like. They're going to try to get you to click on those porn sites. They're going to try to, even shopping, they're going to try to get you. You say, man, I'd like to have a new purse, and everything you get that afternoon is going to be you trying to buy something to get a purse. Hey, look at this influencer's carrying this. So it just programs you and teaches you how to think instead of you teaching it how to think or using it for good. Like I said, no matter how much good you look at, and this is something we've talked about. We have an IT team like investigating like AI and how that works, and they had a seminar for all of us saying, no, this thing is like data mining. Everything you look at, and then it looks at if you're a 30-something male or a 30-something female or 40-something, it programs you to show you all that stuff that fits your demographic. So it's literally a machine telling you and feeding you this information. And that's what God and Moses are talking about here. He's like, don't conform to that. It's to push back on it, stay away from it. So I think that's the first and most important part, is to don't be conformed. But second, and I think the biggest that we have to understand, is worship our way doesn't work for God. It just doesn't. If we try to do it, if we try to make it work, if we try to, well, you know what, I think we should probably, we should do this or we should do that with our worship. Or we need, you know what we need? We need more lights and more extravagant music and stuff like that. And you see that in a lot of modern. I love awesome worship music. I've been to some churches that it'll blow. It's almost like a concert. It'll blow your socks off. But I don't think that's how God intended worship to be. I don't think we should worship the music. It's still intended to worship God. Now that music can pull us in and draw us closer, but I'm old school in this way, I guess. I just don't think a concert is what God intended for us, how us to worship. It's more of a, let's lift all our voices too. Let's sing praise to God. And that's something I'm proud of how we do. I think we have a worship center, our singing and all that pour, and you can see it through Abby, the way she sings and the way she sings to the Lord and leads the congregation in singing. It's about worship to God, not about look at how good we can sing and how many lights we have. I mean, if you don't believe it, look how many times our lights flicker or go out accidentally. You can tell. I mean, it's just the way we worship and the way I think God intended for it to worship. So it's very much and you hear this nowadays too, and there are even country songs about it, but I'm not going to church, I'm going to worship the Lord on the lake. I'm going to go spend time with the Lord on the golf course. I don't need to be in worship. I draw to the Lord when I'm in the mountains, or I'm on the golf course, or I'm on the lake, or I'm in the tree stand. those are all times 100% you can draw close to the Lord. It's great to have that time to spend with the Lord. But is that what He intended our worship to be? No, it's not. It's not the, hey, I'll just worship the Lord on the golf course. Again, spend time. You know, it's probably not on a golf course. It's a place you can cuss more than you want to draw closer to the Lord. But
We should mental sanity.
yeah, it really tests you. I don't know, that might be an evil game. But my point is it's not intended for that time to be worship. It's intended you can spend that time with the Lord, spend time in prayer with the Lord. It's one-on-one time with the Lord, but it's not worship. So what is worship? How do we worship? What's the right way to worship?
Come to church.
Yeah, pretty easy, right?
First step.
Yeah, that's step one. It's kind of hard to do any other thing unless you just cover step one, 100%. It's called, have you ever heard the term corporate worship? It's kind of what we call it, right? It's corporate worship. It's kind of a weird term, but this is the definition of corporate worship. The collective gathering of believers to honor God through unified activities like prayer, singing, reading scripture, and the primary purpose of glorifying God and build up the church community. It is distinct from individual worship, and it involves a community response and a focus on edifying one another as well as God. That was a great definition I found online, and I think it pretty much covers it. It is great to individually worship God. He wants that. He wants that individual relationship. Salvation is an individual thing. But He set it up to be a communal thing. We see it in the Bible. We see it with the Israelites. They come together and worship, right? They don't just kind of do their own thing and set up a temple under a tree. God intended for people together to be together, to lift each other up, to worship together, because the truth is that worship that we do together, lifted up to God, is even higher praise, right? When we do it together, it is even a higher praise to God, because we're lifting all of our voices as one to God. So that's why it's important to have corporate worship. That's why it's important to be not only involved in the church, but intimately involved in church. Volunteer, do things. A lot of y'all, most of y'all in here are working, and sometimes as bad as those kids aggravate you, that's been some of the best times I've had working at church is some of those kids, because all of a sudden, guess what happens when you see them at Walmart? They run up and give you a hug. They know you. I mean, you speak to that as being a teacher and all that. I mean, that's part of the rewarding, and that is a blessing and a gift from God, are those rewards and benefits that you get out of serving His kingdom. So it's my encouragement to be involved. Like I said, most of y'all in here, you're in Sunday school, you're involved. You were involved. But I encourage you to share the gifts that you've gotten out of being involved in serving the Lord and teaching and working with the kids and whatever it is you do in that service. Share it with others and share those blessings, because it really is. And it's just, and Cole can tell you, anybody else that's taught, more times than not, the gift of studying and teaching is not on a Sunday morning when you get up here and talk. It's on like a Tuesday night when you figure out something you've never figured out in the Bible. You're like, man, that's pretty interesting. You get down a rabbit hole. You're like, man, I got to get back on track, or I'm not going to have anything to talk about Sunday. But it leads you down a road of studying something else that you end up doing on your own, and that's part of the blessing that God gives you out of that service to Him. So it's really, that's the two things. Don't be conformed by your surroundings, and worship the way God intended us to worship, not the way we want to worship, and not what feels good to us. The prosperity gospel is not the gospel. It's just not. God wants us to prosper. We will prosper through God. But that prospering is salvation through the Lord. It's not what we know as the prosperity gospel now. Ultimately, God will take care of us, and He does great things for us, and you have a nice house to live in and all that, but does He really care about any of that? He sees the bigger picture. He is Alpha and Omega. He doesn't know that matters. It's our salvation and our eternal soul that matters, and that's what God cares about. And that's why He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for our sins, because that's what He cares about. So, anything else? Any other questions? Thoughts on worship? All right. That's all I got this morning. Cole, you close us out in prayer?
Yes, sir. Dear Lord, we come to you this morning, praise you and thank you for everything, Lord. Thank you for the message you put on Kyle's heart this morning. Lord, I just pray that as we go out this week, Lord, I pray that you lead, guide, and direct us. And Lord, just let us be your hands and feet. Thank you for all that you do and have done.